Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. This morning I woke up, and the first thing that ran through my mind is that it was Friday. I wanted to watch Becoming a Spectacle, the WrestleMania 9 documentary that was uploaded to Peacock this morning, and roughly around 6:45 to 7 a.m., it was up and it was ready to go. I was pumped. I've talked about the true story of WrestleMania coming out right before my WrestleMania 27 trip to Atlanta. And that was kind of like a documentary that they ran through all of the WrestleManias, giving like the build up to them. Sometimes they talked about where it was, how it became to be. Sometimes it was more about the matches that were there. It jumped around a lot. But that got me really, really fired up for what WrestleMania was and what WrestleMania was to that day. This one here is a special one to me because of the fact, WrestleMania 41 is going to be in Las Vegas. I am lucky enough to be heading out on that trip. And a while back, I made a video, WrestleMania 41 Tips and Tricks to Las Vegas. And in that, I gave away some of the things that might not be important to you, but was important to me. Even if I go and I look at it, much like when I went to Dallas for WrestleMania 32, we went to the Von Erich's gravesite. We went to the Sportatorium, even though now it is just torn down, and all it was basically a grassy lot. But I swear that when we were walking around out there, me, Miguel, and Jem, we could feel something. I don't know how to to get it over to you guys, but I felt something. When I go to WrestleMania, I want to go to the former home of the Debbie Reynolds Casino, which is right next to the convention center where the World is going to be. It is an empty lot, but basically at one point in the late 90s, Vince McMahon bought the Debbie Reynolds Casino, and his plan was to make the WWF Casino, and they were going to transfer everything over somewhere along the way. I think they were learning about what it takes to get and keep a gambling license. I think they were looking at how much the renovations were going to be for what they wanted to do, and they pulled out, and they decided that the gambling business was not for them. They owned it for roughly a year or two before finally finding somebody else to buy it, and they sold it off. They never got to put the WWF Casino sign up or anything like that, or change the names. But that is something that I want to see, because I remember the story when it first came out, and the people that said that it was going to be the biggest thing for Las Vegas for Vince McMahon to be involved. And I also want to travel down the street to Caesar's Palace, where this documentary took place, and see the former home of WrestleMania 9, which was a boxing arena that they built in the parking lot. They talk about the fact that they had a fight there in 1988. Sugar Ray Leonard, I can't remember who he fought, but I've always thought it was very funny that when I watched SummerSlam 1998, it basically turns into a boxing HBO commercial. And I did not know that the reason why they did that was because the WWF was doing all of the television and marketing for that fight. Vince McMahon had bought in. He had been sort of like an investor that thought that he could push that and make some money off of it. And that's why Sugar Ray is there. That's why they show the commercial. That's why they're talking about Las Vegas, even though that show is in New Jersey. And, it makes sense. But, Vince, he had an idea. They went to the Caesars. They took over the city. The boxing arena that they were able to build for them, WWF had a look that they had to feel. They felt like they had already sold all of the tickets, for the show. But much like Orlando, for WrestleMania 20, what was that, 23, 24? I think it's 24. They took that stadium, and they put tons of money to refurbish it to make it look better than it was. because it was like an ancient football stadium that was basically falling apart. And there was lots of stories that came out that, the bathrooms were not able to hold for WrestleMania. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they've never been back to Orlando since that WrestleMania. But lots of things came popping up. That they needed to do this, they needed to do that. I really well, I've talked about the fact that one of the reasons why I had such a bad time at WrestleMania 32 was my ever-going memory of how long it took to get into the arena. Um, when we went to Cowboy Stadium that day, I believe it took us 5 hours to get off of the bus and into our seat. And it wasn't like we were tailgating around a car in the parking lot and we were taking our time. We walked right up, we got into line, and the line did not move. WrestleMania 9 had the same problems where basically they talk about, a Vegas boxing crowd doesn't show up for the first fight. They kind of like tail in along the way because most of the time the people only want to see the main event that's on that card. That's the only thing they're looking forward to. So, it's kind of like an ever flow of people, just kind of making their way in. WWF, they had sort of trained their fans that you want to be there for before the show all the way until the end. And they had, two entrances into WrestleMania 9, and there was, 10,000 people outside trying to get in, and they only had the two ticket takers pretty much. And so a WWF executive as well as Linda McMahon went up and they started tearing tickets, helping people get into the arena faster because they didn't want to start the show without a full crowd, much like WrestleMania 8. Where they didn't sell tons and tons of tickets to the Hoosier Dome. So Gorilla Monsoon is covering for it and basically saying that there's a traffic problem on the outside and people are taking their time to get in because it's hard to get into the parking lot. It's a good way to kind of cover up for it. This WrestleMania documentary, it was good. It was not great. I'll tell you that. There was wrestling. There was the wrestling business, which is kind of what I like the most, kind of like the backstage talk. But this one was a lot of like production talk about how they were going to do this, how they were going to do that, how they built this, how they built that. The main nitty gritty of this whole thing, I was kind of really surprised that they didn't talk about the Ultimate Warrior at all. If you go back to the ending of WrestleMania 8, the Ultimate Warrior makes his return and saves Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan had said that he is going to retire from wrestling, step away. Hulk Hogan had kind of thought that Vince was telling him that his days of running the WWF were done and they needed to move into a new direction. So he was like, okay, that's fine. I'll step back and see, what he's able to do. I think he really thought that Vince was going to come calling, saying that he was not able to do it without him. So he went off and he made Mr. Nanny. I think he had already made Suburban Commando, so he had been in the movie business. He just, he was just trying to get out there and do more to see how far that would take him. If he could be the next Arnold Schwarzenegger, if he could be the next Sylvester Stallone or something like that. It ended up never really ever coming to be. He made a few movies where he was the headliner, but he kind of like fell into like be like movie roles later in his career, especially around like the WCW days. That's where Suburban Commando came from. That's where Three Ninjas. I can't remember what the side name of that movie was, but I think that was like the third or fourth movie that was in that long line. But they moved into the direction of Bret Hart being the face of the WWF. Of course, the title, moved from Savage to Ric Flair. And then, as a wrestling fan at the time, just sporadically at a house show. I think they showed it on Primetime Wrestling. But to get the news out there, I remember seeing it on WWF Superstars as like a a wrestling update. It like flashed up right before they went to like the first commercial, and they were like, last night in Canada, there was a WWF show, and Bret the Hitman Hart beat Ric Flair for the WWF Championship. And to me, Bret Hart was a really good wrestler. He was like a guy at the Intercontinental title place. So for me, seeing somebody come from the middle to the top was huge. Although, like, I was such a marquee fan that I believed that anybody could win the Royal Rumble. Anybody could win any match. I remember like getting like the WWF program, and like when you flipped open the first page on the back side of the cover, there would normally be a thing, and it said like WWF Superstars, and in a whole bunch of boxes, they would have probably like the top 20 to 25 guys. And I remember like going home, and I would like pit guys against each other on that page, trying to like make my own card, and really believing that any day that the Repo Man could beat the Ultimate Warrior. I mean, why would he be a WWF wrestler if he wasn't good? You know what I mean? You like dream up some dream scenario that anybody could beat anybody, but a guy like Bret Hart becoming the WWF champion, that was the first time it was like, oh wow, anything really could happen. Because you got to think, as a wrestling fan, like probably 90% of that time, Hogan had been the champion. Of course, they did the thing with WrestleMania 4, where he got beat by Andre the Giant. Then they had to put the belts into the tournament, which was won by Savage. Hogan takes the belt back to Savage. They do that like really small turn with Undertaker beating him, and then Hogan beats him back, and then they give the belt to Flair at the Rumble. So, there really wasn't a lot of title changes at that time. It wasn't until like the Attitude Era that it really just starts flipping around and going crazy. But I think in order to like boost sales, it's hard to say like who called who, if Hogan called Vince, if Vince called Hogan. But the initial plans was to have WrestleMania 9 with no Hulk Hogan. That's what was sold to Las Vegas. That's what was sold to Caesar's Palace. Even though deep down, not Vince, but WWF executives really believed that Hogan was going to be there. That there was no way they could do WrestleMania without Hulk. But just right before it, Hogan is added onto the card. They have a Monday Night Raw where basically Money Inc. Jumps Brutus Beefcake. Hogan comes the next week to make the save. They issue a challenge. Then Money Inc. says they're going to put the tag titles on the line. And Money Inc. versus Hulk Hogan and Brutus the Barber Beefcake is added to the WrestleMania 9 card. Hulk even says in this documentary that he was really, really lost. He was a fish out of water. I'm sure he's done house show tag team matches along the way to have some easier shows where they're not doing a ton of work. They're just trying to get through. But wrestling on pay-per-view in a big match, in a tag match, he really didn't know 100% what was going on. Basically they do the whole deal with the disqualification. Money Inc. keeps the titles. The Megamaniacs, Hulk and Beefcake, they look strong out there. They're taking the money and they're tossing it around to the crowd. There was 5s, there was 10s, there was 20s, and a few $100 bills sprinkled into there. So it wasn't like they were throwing around all of the $1 Million Man's money, but they were throwing around a lot out there. That was really fun. But as soon as they get to the back, Hulk looks at Jimmy Hart and he basically says, "Hey, I might be doing something else tonight." And that's where we get into the whole deal of they flash back to Friday night. Friday night, they pull Bret Hart aside, and Vince McMahon tells them that they're going to go in a different direction. They're going to give the belt back to Hulk to try and boost like more limelight on the company. He's the guy that's always been the top dog, and Brett gets really hurt feelings about this. He's saying, "Did I do something wrong? Was it not your champion?" I saw a headline yesterday that he did an interview saying that Vince promised him that he was going to be a 6-year champion. I haven't listened to the interview yet, but I don't know about that. I'll say this about Bret Hart. Bret Hart says a lot of stuff that comes off very negative about, the wrestling that went on back in the day. He says a lot of negative stuff about the stuff that's going on. Nobody ever really calls Bret out as a liar. Nobody ever kind of like tries to show the other side. Bret ends up coming out, looking really good long term down the road. He was one of the first guys to be very negative about the Vince McMahon, even though like the people that think the negative things about, Vince now, it's not really the same reasons that Bret was saying, but Bret kind of comes out looking good on that. But some of the stuff he says sometimes I just shake my head and it doesn't really make sense to me. But I wasn't there. I just don't know how Vince walks up to him and just says, "You know what? You're going to be my champion for 6 years." Nobody knows what tomorrow is going to bring. 1993 was a different time in the wrestling business. It was really starting to slip. 94, they go into really, really dark days. 95, 96, the nose is still going down, but they're starting to pull it out of the water. Putting on really good wrestling shows, but a lot of people are really starting to watch Nitro instead, and it's kind of like the real fans knew that WWF was having fun, and it was a better show, but like that WCW Nitro party kind of crowd was going strong, and then those numbers kept coming in saying that WCW had more people following their product, but shit, where was I? But the plan is told to Bret that Hogan is going to go over, and they show it in the moment. They show that super fan down there on the outside, Vladimir, and they ask him, how the show was, and he says it was awesome. What was the best part? And he said, Hulk Hogan coming out on top at WrestleMania. I can remember at WrestleMania 9, feeling pretty pumped that Hogan became the champion again. Hogan was my guy. Around the time they started rolling out the King of the Ring, and then they gave like Bret Hart the number one seed in the tournament, saying that he did not need to qualify because he was a former champion, and that what had happened at WrestleMania 9, and they were going to be doing a Hulk versus Yokozuna rematch. I honestly felt sorry for Bret, that he sort of got the squeeze, and that he wasn't going to be able to get a rematch or be in the title picture. The Hogan thing didn't last long. That's kind of the real negative thing about it. I'm not sure if the Hulk saw the business was going down and the money wasn't rolling in the same way. But Hulk basically works the summer and is out of there. I was really hoping that they were going to, bring up the plans for SummerSlam, which was Bret versus Hogan, but it never really comes to be. It's never really brought up. It's just sort of, Hogan got the belt. Bret had his feelings hurt, and that's kind of the end of it. They didn't really go into inside business there that much. What they did go into inside business a lot, and gives him innuendos. They even used the Macho Man's commentary for it, was Hogan's black eye at WrestleMania 9. Basically, Hogan didn't show up to Caesars until the day of he didn't come until the day before WrestleMania 9 was the first time he had showed up. A day before that, him and the Brutus Beefcake were out there on the bay. They were strolling around on some Sea-Doos, and I guess that when he was messing with I was gonna call it the trigger, but the what makes the Sea-Doo go? Basically, he locked into having the nose down on the Sea-Doo. So when he was flying across the water, he said he was shooting like a rocket, going 80 miles an hour. He hit a wave and he ended up going over the top. When he came down, the Sea-Doo was coming at him and ended up hitting him right in the face. They didn't go into the story of Brutus the Beefcake having to pull him out and save him from drowning, which they've gone into before in other documentaries and stuff like that. But then they kind of really, Undertaker's like, when he looked at Hogan's eye, it looked like he should have bobbed instead of he should have weaved. Scott Steiner, who is pretty negative on Hulk Hogan. Everybody can remember the incident that happened at WrestleMania 31 with Hulk's wife. And then Scott Steiner started getting banned from WWE for a while, and then him having his picture put up at the Hall of Fame, like, do not let this guy enter, like he was on the FBI wanted list or something like that. But I don't know, man. Scott Steiner says that Macho Man was the guy that rode with him on the road and told him that he punched him in the eye. To me, the timeline kind of matches up to around the divorce and Miss Elizabeth. Miss Elizabeth was staying at the Hogan house, and the Hogans were not telling Savage that she was there. Savage wanted her to come home. They wanted Miss Elizabeth to have a safe place to live and was trying to get her out of a situation. Savage looked at Hogan like he was the bad guy. I don't know. I mean, when Hogan makes his entrance for the Money Inc. match for the tag titles, Savage immediately says that it looks like somebody got him with the cheap shot. He says something about Hogan getting punched again, and you play into it. Damn. It does kind of, it does kind of make it look like, oh, you can use that in that situation. It's what happened. It's what wrestling fans want to believe. It might not really be it. I've never heard it with my own ears, but people have said that Jim Cornette on his podcast says that it happened right in front of him and he saw it. I don't really remember Jim Cornette being in WWF around WrestleMania 9, unless it was a backstage role and he wasn't actually being used as the manager yet. I can't think of him being with anybody on that show. I can't think of any reason for him to be there. I'm thinking that he would still be working for WCW. But I'm not 100% sure. But that was like the biggest story that they went into on this documentary. That is like the money of it all. It's like, what happened to Hogan's eye? Was it Macho Man? Lex Luger, he didn't want no part of it. He was just kind of like saying that it looked like a bad situation. I'll tell you the truth. This doc was good. It really wasn't great. I'm looking forward to trying to get into the Caesar's Palace pool when I'm there for WrestleMania 9. I'm not going to need to be there for an hour. It's just going to be kind of like a 5-minute, like, oh, look, this is it. I'm not even really 100% sure where it is. I've heard that they build the Augustus Tower, kind of like where that arena was. In the documentary, they were up on the steps of the former Caesars convention center, which is like kind of on the end of the pool period. There's the Caesars Coliseum that they have built, which is like their new auditorium arena that they do a lot of concerts and things at. So somewhere in that, when I'm out there, I'm going to feel something. I know they have the circular pool with like the kind of like fountain almost with a top on it that's out there in the middle. It's somewhere around there. I'm hoping that when I look up in the air, I'll still see like the Caesar's Palace Tower that I guess you can see during the WrestleMania 9 matches when things are shot from the floor looking up. But I'm not really 100% sure where it is. Everybody kind of has their own different feel off of this documentary. They show the pool area, and the guy is standing on the steps, and he says he's about 20 feet from where the ring would have been. So I guess I'm gonna kind of use that for the most thing. But it's Friday. I leave on Wednesday. I can honestly tell you that WWE did a good job, and I'm more excited than I was. Highlight for me was the fact that WWE did not remove Vince McMahon from this situation, which I really thought they would have done. And maybe this is like the perfect time for this to come out, but maybe that's kind of one reason why it took so long for this documentary to come out. It wasn't like they were publicizing that they had made it, but WrestleMania 27, when the true story of WrestleMania came out, that was a long time ago. And that's when we really saw this footage for the first time of how much stuff they shot backstage. And I really thought that they would have gone, with a fine tooth comb and kind of removed everything Vincey from this documentary. We don't see him, helping, with the ring crew. We don't see him backstage, telling guys what to do for their interviews. We don't see him talking to Brett and Hogan about the finish of the night. I give him to that. I'm sure a lot of people out there will say some negative things about Vince being in the documentary and how could they. Every once in a while, Chris Benoit, who they love to remove from everything, they don't even like to put on the bottom of the screen, like with the match, like when you can skip to a certain point, it doesn't even like to say, Chris Benoit versus Chris Jericho. It'll say Chris Jericho wrestles in a singles match. So I tip my hat to them. It's hard to tell the story of WrestleMania 9 without Vince. I understand that we are in the Triple H era. Some people say it's a better era now because they've got the old guy out of the way. But you got to remember why they're at WrestleMania 41, and you can't do that without Vince McMahon.